Good morning, everyone. We are going to jump right in, get started. Jim McDermott here, and my counterparts, Nora and Dustin, are on as well. I've got a packed agenda. Hopefully, if you like data, this session is going to be for you. So, welcome to the DAACAT. Well, like I said on the agenda, I'm going to hit on some of the yield data. Definitely starting to see trends, fungicide response information. Also, just have some plots at the end to share. Also, talk a little bit about a continuation from 2 weeks ago where we had harvest trends. And I think this is also a good time where other people can put comments in the chat if they want on the harvest trends that they're seeing, either by product or just by some of the environmental conditions you're seeing. First of all, trivia question though, and this is going to be a hybrid guessing contest. So the correct answer will be a DEKALB hybrid. So I'm just going to throw out a few clues, and then as somebody starts to get an idea on what these clues add up to for a hybrid, you go ahead and put it in the chat. So this is a Smart Stacks hybrid. It is a hybrid that is rated very highly on roots and stalks and drought tolerance. Actually rated a 2 on each of those. This hybrid is in the maturity range of 105 to 110, one of our higher volume products. Very consistent ability to handle a lot of different soil types. With that 2 on drought rating, it takes some lighter soils as well as some poorly drained, tougher clays. Hybrid also has very good test weight, dark grain color, great grain quality. All right, it's like David Simonson is the winner. 110.10, exactly right on. Well done. Was willing to wait it out, but didn't have to wait the full 30 minutes. Congratulations, David. All right, well, let's jump in, talk a little bit about current topics, and I guess continuation of harvest trends that us as agronomists are seeing, but others as agronomists on the line, you can certainly add in. Certainly seeing the maturity response as normally we do, but I would say this year it's been more varied. In fact, there's been some plots and just field situations where earlier hybrids have actually done better than expected. And to me, I think a lot of it does come down to were you able to finish before that late disease pressure set in? I mean, obviously we know southern rust and tar spot in places came in late and hit hard. And some products, if they were on the earlier side, I'm thinking 98, 88, 99, 11 in our lineup, some cases they were able to get more ear fill done, say before 110, 114 day hybrid, and that was able to help them out. Certainly still have some maturity response, but that's something that's a little more unique to this year as compared to the last few. That second bullet point, we saw a fair amount of this last year, but some of these hybrids that really rely on kernel depth, and we're seeing more and more of those type of hybrids. Those are the ones that tend to get hurt a little bit more by late season disease, heat, lack of moisture, all those things that shut some of this crop down early. And some of those factors that, of course, contributed to more brittle stalks and some softer stalks out there. And then I think everyone has seen it, but clearly more yield swings this year. Last year there was yield swings from drowned out spots and wet areas. This year it's more from variations in disease tolerance, stay green, how much late heat tolerance, and even drought tolerance did those hybrids have. It all depended on if a hybrid was able to get to the finish line with some plant health or not. Those are a few observations, I guess, some just on continuing on the general trends, but Dustin, Nora, anything you two want to throw in?
Yeah. Yeah, Jim, that's probably the name of the game this fall has just been the variability we have. just wild swings from not within, a few miles of one another. You have, 150 bushel corn to 230 bushel corn within maybe sometimes even the same section. And as we look at, I mean, we killed a lot of these fields early, and you went out and done kernel counts, and it kernel counted up well, rows around in length, but we lost a lot of kernel depth. We killed a lot of these crops from both ends between crown rot and then the onset of southern rust and all of these leaf diseases to take away all that photosynthetic factory at the top part of the plant, and then pair that with a little bit of crown rot around, and we really hurt grain fill this fall.
I think I agree with all these. And one thing I'll throw in is we really are seeing a difference in a history of a farm and then different management on those farms. So we're seeing some patterns where maybe if something was coming out of alfalfa, especially in soybeans, it was reacting a little bit differently. We saw what we think are some old pasture lines in some yield maps, changing the history of what's underneath that field. Maybe areas where there was history of alfalfa and it's very depleted in potassium. Weird things like that are also showing up to then increase the variability within the field.
Yeah, that potassium one is an interesting point too, Nora. We went through a stretch there in June where there was a fair amount of potassium deficiency showing up, and we weren't necessarily dry, but this temporary potassium deficiency did show up, and that affects hybrid performance and especially affects stock quality, which some cases then showed up later in the fall. So, jump into some data here on fungicide response, and this is down at our Sac City Research Farm. Ben Colby is the manager down there and does a great job. So we showed these slides 2 weeks ago on the DAACAT call, just as a setup, and we also had the aerial picture as well as some other leaf shots. Just as a reminder, these are the different treatments with rates of Delaro 8, 10, 12 ounces, the 2 applications, Delaro Complete followed by Delaro, and then several other competitive treatments, which we won't talk about really this morning, but really want to jump into some of the actual responses. So picture here is the untreated, of course, seeing southern rust coming in, and especially showing the lack of stay green late season. And then as I slide through these, we'll show each application and what type of yield response we had from the untreated. So Delaro Complete at 8 ounces, kind of that standard treatment at R1, pretty decent response. Maybe not as much as what you might think, given the pressure. I would say, there's certainly fields that were heavier than this, but this had kind of your typical southern rust and a little bit of tar spot late. So the 10 ounces stair step up slightly. You definitely can see it on the stay green. And then the 12 ounce rate, clearly see the stay green improvement and the leaf health without the southern rust showing on that left side, and 18.3 bushel response. So a little more than the 8 ounce, stair stepped up from the 10 ounce. Still not maybe that huge response that we're seeing in some fields. I will say, and you can see it in the overhead, I mean, these are long strips replicated 3 times. But sometimes in smaller plot work, you don't tend to see as big a fungicide response as you do in whole fields, just because whole field situations, you have a chance for that disease to spread a lot more rapidly or more aggressively. And that's typical, like in the Iowa State trials or any university trials that are small plot. You don't tend to see near the fungicide response as you do in whole field situations. And then I thought this was interesting, looking at the R3 application. A lot of speculation. Well, what if we would have applied fungicide later, maybe closer to the time when the southern rust really came in? Well, in this particular location, in this trial, that really didn't help us out. and judging by that picture on the left, you already seen enough southern rust that had come in that did some damage. So limited yield response there from that R3 application. And then lastly, in this trial, the two-shot application, so Delaro Complete followed by Delaro, both of them at 8 ounces, so R1, R3, gave about the exact same response as the one shot at the higher rate. So this is one trial. It's a very good trial, again, replicated, but it'll be interesting to see as we get more data in how this compares. But really interesting on the two shot as compared to the one shot up front with the higher rate coming out exactly the same for yield response. Ben, comments that you want to throw in on this particular trial?
I think you covered most of it, Jim. I did see southern rust show up. July 9th was when I first noticed the pustules. So that was about 2 weeks before the first spray at R1. So it probably had a few cycles before I got anything sprayed.
Yeah, and I'd say that was fairly typical. I mean, as you went farther north, your research farm is right just north of Highway 20. And as you went farther north, generally that disease came in later, especially as we got up to Highway 9. And we're seeing that in overall yields and just fungicide responses as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the rest of this data comes through this fall. Like you said, Jim, there's been a lot of interest. Maybe if we would have held off that application to R3, do we see a bigger benefit? But then I just think back over the last 10 to 15 years, where we've seen big responses to fungicide, it has been at that VT application and not moving it later in the season. So I don't think we want to move away from that VT application. And then it's really interesting that how that data came out. As we talk about herbicides, we have always talked about upping the rates, using full labeled rates to extend that residual. And we need to have those similar conversations when we're talking about a fungicide, upping those rates to extend that residual.
Yeah, well, I agree, Dustin. Yeah, at the time we're spraying at R1, we don't know what kind of pressure we're going to have, especially if it's going to be late pressure. So you kind of have to go with what's been proven and what the data has shown over the last few decades, really, when it comes down to it. Second trial there at Sac City, and this was a hybrid response. So I maybe didn't mention it, but the last trial was all done on DKC 11010. Good one to have since it was our trivia answer. This shows response by several different hybrids. You can see 10133 and then on over to the right. So pretty good range of maturities. That average yield response of about 14 bushels. So similar to what the last trial was showing. But of course, not a surprise to anybody, but southern rust tolerance is what drove the overall response. You look at 10533 with a 6 rating, and it was showing about as big a response as any hybrid. A couple hybrids that don't have official ratings, 10133, 10414. Both of them look decent in the field, so there is an asterisk on those ratings as they're more preliminary. But 10307, very little response. 10698, 5626, generally good on southern rust. Very little response. So it really kind of follows along. And boy, I guess this also means, and Dustin and Nora, I'll throw it over to you as far as what does that mean for selection on hybrids for next year?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing is we're going in and selecting products for, 26. It's never good to look at, 1 year data to make your decisions and swing the pendulum too far. But now that we've, had 2 years of southern rust, it definitely is going to be part of the conversation. And we need to make sure our growers are not, have all sensitive hybrids out there, but we don't want to throw out some products that maybe, we're a little sensitive. We can manage around southern rust. And now knowing what we know this year, especially as we move south, we probably should have been a little more aggressive with some second applications.
I'll throw in, and I think I've told this group before, but I kind of forget who I tell it to. One consideration is to, when looking at placement, let's think about those fields that are difficult to get a second application into for whatever reason, and use our mix of scoring the different genetics that we're going to have in there. Let's make sure we're placing the fields that are the most tolerant or on the fields that are the most difficult to get into, whether it's through a pasture or by town or whatever, because we're going to need those mix of genetics for a optimum package, but we want to be able to manage, work smarter, not harder, essentially.
Yeah, well, great points. And then just this, Ben had put this information together, great information, Ben, as far as by score, yield response, and I think we'll see a lot of that as people evaluate their yield data from this year. One last thing on this is just the aerial shot of the trial we were just looking at by hybrid. Not dramatic. This was taken mid-September, and the left side is treated, right side is not. So, certainly can see some intactness differences. A few hybrids, especially in here, really started to show some stay green, but, not as dramatic as some of the other photos you might see, but, 14 bushel response. So you're not gonna see just a stark line. But definitely as far as that plant health, stay green and intactness, in addition to the yield response, is showing up pretty clearly.
All right, so this is a trial coordinated by one of our sales agronomists over in East Central Iowa named Dustin Thomas. This is a great setup with one of our dealers. And why I wanted to show this is that I think it's a really great reminder that even in this tough economic situation that we're seeing, a high management scenario paid out this year. Even when the prices didn't look so great, even when guys kind of are getting burned out, high management really worked out here. So there are more products in this trial. I just ran out of page space. So if you want to dig into it, please reach out to one of us and we can get it for you. Like I said, this was done over in East Central Iowa. In this high management scenario, it is a fungicide treatment. It is a 2-pass program. So it has a triple mode of action product at VT, along with a foliar nutrient and insecticide, followed by a generic pass later in the season after that wore off. Also, there is no freshman class of products. So this is the infield products. We are seeing that our freshman class as a whole does have a higher level of tolerance to southern rust. So that might have changed how things looked response wise. So please note that there is no freshman class here, but we're seeing, on average, a 40 bushel advantage with that high management scenario. And I was running around yesterday and driving and didn't get a chance to really dig into what their costs were to give you that ROI, because there is significant cost with the 2-pass program and insecticide and all that stuff. I think we can all agree it did not cost us $160. $4 corn. We're not putting $160 into that nutrient program. So it did end up with a positive ROI. I really like this picture that Dustin had of the yield map from Climate Field View to really show. We don't have a drone picture like Jim, but really dramatic change in these management blocks. I've been to this field, very even, flat, think flat river bottom, but not with the tigerness that sometimes we attribute that. Really great plot location, and I applaud the entire team for getting this data. So if you want more details, reach out to us. But as we're going forward into next year, let's remind guys that we don't want to give up. Moral of the story, we don't give up. The guys that pivoted and didn't give up and kept managing, they're the ones that are going to come out on top this year. And we want to continue that conversation going into next year. There is light at the end of the tunnel. There is positive return on these investments, even though that can be a tough check to write in this day and age, price-wise. So any comments, Dustin and Jim?
No, It's really interesting to see this. And I just look back at the summer, and I wish we would have been a little more aggressive, with that second application, especially as we move south and east down towards Fort Dodge and Des Moines. Just the amount of pressure of southern rust moving in. It would have paid to do some second applications. Because like I said earlier, it kernel counted out, but we just lost a lot of kernel depth and weight late in the season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. And especially with a lot of areas having some dry weather and having heat near the end of that growing season, I think those things added to the stress of the foliar disease pressure too.
So here's a good chart. So obviously there's a lot of talk about phantom yield loss. Does it happen? Does it not? But the biggest thing that I see this year is just the dry down that we had. We have corn coming out at 11.5%. So this is taken into account shrink factor, but then looking at Purdue's research that we lose 1% dry matter loss per point moisture reduction. So there's a potential, you're looking, this doesn't include mechanical loss either. So you're looking, sub 15, you get down to 11%. That's a 14 bushel loss just in shrink and potential phantom yield loss. That does not include any mechanical loss. And as driving across Northwest Iowa the last few weeks and these early harvested cornfields, we have a cover crop growing in a lot of these cornfields. We had a lot of head shatter this year with this dry corn, and we're upwards of 15 to 20 bushel loss with this dry corn. So I think as we're talking with our growers this fall, and it has been a trend over the last several years that we've been trying to move growers later in relative maturity, and we're seeing yield advantage again as you push later relative maturity. And then we get away from trying to harvest, sub 15% corn. So I'm not saying we have to move drastically, but we need to move the median. If a guy is sweet spots 105, can we move him to 108, and go around that? It's not, let's go sell 114, 117 day corn in Dickinson County, Iowa, but can we move them up a few days?
Yeah, good points, Dustin. Just one touch on soil temperatures. We kind of know that it's been running a little bit warmer than normal, especially through September and the first half of October. As of yesterday, soil temperatures still in the low to mid 50s. And as of this morning, right now, the 28th of October is the first forecasted date when we're going to have soil temperatures below 50 across most of Iowa. There's a few days in there, 23rd, 24th, where we along the Minnesota border may be getting right below 50, but as far as wide scale temperature forecasting below 50 right now, the 28th of October is that date. Subject to change based on the weather, of course. Well, Nora, I'm going to hand it over to you. Talk a little bit about yield analysis and looking at making sense of the yield, especially through climate field view.
Yeah, you guys are going to know this is my jam. I love to dig into data. One thing that I really, and on good thing I talk fast with 5 minutes left. I like this slide, the very top point. Are you using ag technology to plan for higher yields? How are we going to actually analyze our data and make decisions? So I have some interesting data points that have come from digital ag that I'd like to share with you guys. So in 2014, it was estimated that a farm could generate 190,000 data points a day. In 2025, it's estimated that it could be 500,000 data points a day on a given operation. And by 2050, 4.1 million data points a day, right? There's a lot of decision-making points. 72% of growers across the US are saying they're using an ag management software in some type of capacity. And of those farmers surveyed, they attribute 11.8% of the yield increase that they've seen over the last 5 years to digital ag usage. Growers that also use digital ag are higher adopters of getting management recommendations from outside sources, employing consultant services at a higher rate. They're wanting to do better. These users that are using an ag system want to do better. I have been in conversations with some growers this year that are burnt out. I understand that. We all feel that. It's been a tough year. It's tough prices. We don't want to choose for our operation next year based on the vibes, right? All right. We're not going to do that. We want to use data-driven decision. So Jim, if you could go to the next slide, I'm just going to fly through a couple options within FieldView to just kind of get a better understanding of what happened and why. Okay, so this is my first one. This is free. This is free. Anybody can do this. You can do this for any field. This is the weather on climate.com for a given field. You can go in, and this will show up within 30 minutes if you put a field boundary in. And so it will actually give us the estimated rainfall dates. If you see that middle chart, it will show us peaks and valleys of when we got those rains. I think that there are some fields that can see an intense variation from a grower's other field because they caught a couple different rains, for good or bad. And so when digging into that, when digging into the why, if you have a product that you're like, it's doing better than that in other parts of the world. Why is that doing that here? I encourage you to use this tool. Super easy, doesn't require any data, just requires a field boundary on climate.com. You can dig into this compared to average. You can dig into the highs. You could look back on estimated flowering date and say, okay, we were 97 degrees. Maybe that wasn't so great, and compare those flowering dates and heat. So this is a tool when we're wanting to dig in and understand that why, that's super easy. Jim, if you go to the next one. 2 minutes. All right, we'll see how far I can get. So this is the overview from the reports tab that was generated in FieldView a couple of years ago. As a dealer, you guys in this top right corner can choose one operation or multiple. You can aggregate it. You can look over multiple operations at a time to pick up these wide scale patterns. You can compare to what your grower's average is. You can look at yield. You can look at, total weights. You can sort by field, by yield, by the most acres. You can then dive in and look by soil type. You can look by moisture, like the whole thing. You can do all of these different things to help you tease out different answers and different patterns when you're having those selling conversations with your growers. I am a firm believer that the growers that are making data-driven decisions are going to win, and the dealers, the agronomic partners that they have that are helping them make these decisions are the ones that are going to succeed as well. We need to have help with your farmer hat on. This is intense. I don't have the brain power to manage all of this with all the other things that are going on. I need help. And if you want to do better, being this kind of person, call me. I will talk data analysis in FieldView or Op Center all day long. So this is the reports tab. This is per operation or aggregated. Jim, let's head to the next one. I think that this one is interesting. Dustin brought up, we don't want to make data based on 1 year. Guys that have multiple years of data within Climate FieldView, and you can bring in historical data. You don't have to just map it live. There is a tool within FieldView called season over season reporting. You can compare these long trends within an operation. Is the field below average? Is it above average? What did I change? What for good or bad? And pick up and really see these all in one place without having to dig through all the different layers and flip back and forth, and which is kind of annoying. So you can look as an aggregate. Now this is per operation. This is not an aggregate for multiple operations. Caveat here, this is per single operation. Jim, I'm going to go have you scoot down. I'll hit this as the last one, and then I know we're a minute over. Field region reports. Guys, if there's something weird in a field, in FieldView, let's just go ahead and circle that. We will get a full readout, the population within that area, the planting date within that area, the soil types. If there were any different applications in that zone. It will break all of that out for us. It will compare to the field. It will give that yield for that specific area. And then any of those arrows, Jim, if you hit, sorry, one more slide, any of the arrows that go to the right, you can then dig in some more to the different layers within that. It also will include in this application date and range, it will give you applied versus not applied without doing any math, as long as the data is in there. So we're able to really get some easy analysis without having to go to an Excel spreadsheet or anything like that to help us figure out what was successful and what was not this year in all of this craziness. So I know that that was super fast. Like I said, if anybody has, there is also an aggregate version of this in the reports tab. I won't cover that now because we're over time. But if you have any questions, please give me a call, give your DEL a call. If you have, yeah, there's lots of us to help with this data analysis. Jim and Dustin, that was so fast. Do you have anything else?
No, it's a great tool, especially for, like you mentioned, applications, and fungicide application is the obvious one, to do a quick region report to see what that yield response is. Just so many fields don't have that untreated block, because if they're treating, they usually know that there's a yield response. But yeah,
but it does happen. I have surprise check blocks in a field this year, so it does happen.
Mm-hmm.
You can just skip through those and we can go to harvest results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just finish up. These are plots that hopefully your FSRs are getting to you. If not, let us know, or let your FSR know. They should be coming out on a pretty regular basis. But just as you getting enough data now where you can start to see some trends and start to pull some aggregate data. Plot up in Dickinson County, and we had mentioned 11010 before. That's a product that's done well, and especially moves north well. Like Dustin was saying, we do need to be a little more aggressive on pushing maturities, because the Spinco genetics now are I guess referred to them as Spinco genetics. Those products have always been a little later than ours, so we need to be more aggressive that way. This particular plot, I'll point out, that product had coon damage, so we threw it out. It was losing by 50 bushels, so it wasn't fair to leave it in. And the rest of these, again, just flip through, and you'll get these when I send out the PDF of the meeting. But also, hopefully, you're receiving a lot of these already. But that is where we wanted to wrap up. Certainly can open it up for any questions, comments, anything else. Got your QR code, and I'm gonna make sure to give people enough time to snap that. I know 2 weeks ago it was up there, maybe too short a time, because there's a few people that let me know that, hey, I didn't quite get that. But again, it'll get sent out in a day or two. We didn't talk a lot about beans, did we, Dustin or Nora?
No, we did not talk a whole lot about beans.
Nope.
Beans, they're really getting the short end of the stick this year when corn is so dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
But the harvest trend for us has been surprisingly positive bean yields, even with the higher than average SDS visual symptoms. Guys are still fairly happy with yields, and for once, our heavier soils are actually our yield drags, not our hilltops or our knobs. So got guys in our glacial soils, here, Sac County, Carroll County, the guys go, the sand made 25 bushel. That's pretty solid for some of our glacial outwash soils. So
yeah, that certainly has been a trend, but yeah, overall bean yields been pretty solid, and there's been some really good top end, and just at least this year we didn't seem to have quite the variation on beans that we see in some years, or obviously that we're seeing in the corn. Well, that's where we can certainly wrap up, but want to thank everybody for what you do for us on the DEKALB Asgrow side, and thank you for being on this morning.
Thanks, everyone.
have a great day.
Yep, take care.